with Clinch, chatting all things MMA. Hi and welcome to Clinch on eNCA.com, where we talk about MMA in South Africa and the rest of the planet. I've got with me today EFC commentator, Maxim magazine publisher, Men's Fitness, Object magazine editor, Dirk Steenkamp. Dirk, thanks very much for coming, mate.
Thanks for having me, Simon.
I want to talk about EFC 56, but I never had you on the show before, so I want to go back a bit and find out a little bit more about you. 56 can wait. How did you start being a commentator for EFC, and when did it start for you? Like, was that 8 years ago?
Well, pretty much as soon as EFC had its first show, the publishing business was renting office space from them, so we were all in the same building, and pretty much we would interact with each other every single day, and it's just something that had a natural progression where they were looking for someone with the technical MMA knowledge to bring something to the show, and threw me into a sound booth, did a couple of tests, and literally did the next show. So
you were sharing office space with Cairo and Graham and the rest of them, and that's how you met?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So where were you before then? Where did you pick up your MMA knowledge? You were training in combat sports?
Yeah, I think it's just really something that I was incredibly passionate about, from sort of just staying in shape in a workout perspective, as well as obviously the self-defense element that comes along with it. So it's just something that I've been awfully passionate about, and I watched a lot of MMA, when it's still on the VHS tape, that horrific first couple of UFC events.
Yes.
Watched those, absolutely fell in love with the sport, and it's just something that grew from there.
Yeah, no kicks to the groin in the EFC. It was a bit of a shame. I mean, Kevin Rozier in the EFC UFC 3 or 4. I mean, the soccer kicks. That was incredible.
Not a sport. Not a sport.
But entertaining nonetheless.
Absolutely.
So, what was it like back in the early days of the EFC? I mean, was it? Did you look at it rose tinted glasses? I mean, how has it evolved for you? I mean,
it's actually crazy. So, by the time EFC did their first event, there were a couple of other promoters doing MMA events in South Africa. And Cairo and the team said they were going to do this big MMA event, and they were going to focus heavily on the production value, and they wanted to basically put a world-class event together for the athletes that compete in South Africa. So as much as they look back on EFC 1 now and cringe with things that happen on the night and just the basic flow of the show and everything else that happened, it was still so far beyond what was available in the South African market that it literally, I remember sitting cage side and thinking, this is a UFC event. The production level is completely out of this world. I think probably the most fond thing I have from that event is seeing a fighter walk out and a cut man actually putting the Vaseline on pre-fight. That's something that we've never seen. At other events that were happening at the time, and those were seen as the premier events in South Africa, guys would be walking out and someone would bump into them with a beer, and people would be walking around with pizza. You'll hear announcements before the event, can the fighters please bring their music to the DJ booth?
Oh, wow.
And here comes this organization where everything is so professional and clean cut. It was so different from anything else that was available, and I think a lot of people got a fright when they saw the level of what MMA can actually be and how the sport can be treated, if it's been treated correctly, what sort of level it can achieve in the country. And I think the last couple of years is testament to exactly that.
So it was a big step up, and I completely agree with you. We've spoken at the EFC 1 quite a lot with the guys in the past, but these past 7-8 years, how has MMA in South Africa evolved, and with the EFC or without the EFC, or both together, synonymously? How has the sport changed in this country?
Well, I don't think MMA could have evolved in this country if it wasn't for EFC. They spent a lot of money promoting and advertising to the mass market, whereas before, guys would put a couple of flyers out and drop them at their local gym, whereas EFC actually had the balls to go and advertise on radio, put billboards up, big, massive billboards on highways, the street pole adverts before events. And obviously being the first, real proper televised event, they spent millions to get the sport into the mainstream. And that in turn made it a professional sport where guys now could fight for enough money to survive on, could get sponsors so they can be full-time fighters and basically resign from their jobs. And it made the sport professional from that sense that people could start doing it on a full-time basis. And with them being able to put in the time to train, the sport has gotten to a level where the athletes are world-class now. You cannot compare the level that we had, I would say even go back 3 or 4 years ago compared to the guys we have now and the level that they're operating at. I don't think you can compare the two. The growth has been year on year, has been exponential.
Yeah, I don't think people realise how difficult and what kind of investment the guys put in the early days. And everyone thinks it's really easy, but we've seen in terms of other promotions that it's not. But in terms of that idea of where everyone thinks it's really easy, let's put it in the commentating context. I've never met a job where the public's perception is so different from the reality. Everyone thinks that talking fights and calling fights is some of the easiest gig in the world to do. In fact, it's actually the hardest, isn't it? I mean, you used to cop quite a lot of flack in terms of your commentating. Does that still bother you?
I certainly think the hardest job in South Africa right now is being the Springbok rugby coach.
No, I want to be that. No. Well, no, Alistair, come on, shame.
No, it was. It's difficult. It's really, really difficult, and I think it's not just the people not agreeing with what you're saying, what you're calling on the night. People are personally invested in certain fighters and certain athletes, and as soon as you have the smallest bit of criticism about someone's footwork or his head movement or whatever the case may be, then you get a text like, "Oh, I'd love to see you try and get in there and do what that guy's doing." I'm an analyst. I'm by no stretch of the imagination a professional athlete. I've watched. I could probably safely say I've watched more MMA than anyone else in this country. So certainly that doesn't make me a professional on the subject, but I've done a lot of research and I've watched a lot of fights. So I call what I see, and I think as the sport has evolved, the audience has also gotten a lot more educated on the sport. So as much as it was quite bad 3 or 4 years ago because of the emotional investment that some people have in certain fighters, they now also see it more as a professional sport. But I think, the same thing goes for any sport. People are passionate about their specific team or certain players or certain athletes, and they will vehemently defend them against anyone.
Yeah, sure, it's understandable. But do you ever get accusations of bias? I know you before UFC you used to train with the Fight Fit guys. I mean, do you ever get people come up to you and say, "Geez, you think Boyd's the greatest thing since sliced bread," and he actually is. But do you ever get direct accusations of bias from certain camps? Has that ever happened?
In the past, and again, I think it was part of the whole evolution of the sport becoming more professional and people seeing the job for what it is. Back in the day, a fighter would lose, clear loss. Someone got knocked out, and you mentioned he got knocked out, and then that fighter, as well as his camp and his dad and his girlfriend, everyone will be, "Oh, he didn't get knocked out in that fight. How can you say this?" Like, he was unconscious. Therefore, he got knocked out. And it's just stating a fact on what happened. And I think people more and more now actually accept that, whereas in the past, so emotionally invested that it was hard for them to keep quiet.
Yeah, you're not on social media much, are you? Your co-commentator, Cyrus Fees, is tweets up a storm, but you stay away from the trolls, don't you? Yeah, he does have time.
He has time on his hands. I think that's really the only reason.
Do you still find time to hit pads down? Do you still train, or is it just the basic gym stuff now?
Sure, very irregularly. I'd love to start training again, but we had a sort of our little old timers boxing class that we did once a week on a Wednesday last year. Just a bunch of old balding men trying to hit pads and sweat all over each other. It's still a lot of fun, but I'd love to be able to train a lot more frequently, a lot more often.
Yeah, you sound like me. Time is such a problem. What moment stands out then these past 7 years? If I had to put you on the spot and say, what has been the high point for you, or what's been your favourite fight of the past 7 years in the UFC?
Sure, putting me on the spot, I think there are a couple of things that stand out. I think the first encounter when Don Madge fought Costa Ianu, just the actual energy in the building, and it as much as the fight was great, it wasn't the fight itself. I think it was the minute that Costa came out and it was the sea of blue and Greek flags all over the place, and then Don just walked out with the most ridiculous amount of purpose and slamming his chest, and it was crazy. It's stuff like that really, really stands out for me. The Norman Vassell and Champion Dolce weigh-in in Cape Town.
With the paraffin lamp.
when Cairo, like an athlete, caught the lamp in mid-air.
Yeah,
I think it's more, there have been some sensational fights. We talk Leon Maynard, Don Madge, EFC 13. Tons of really, really great fights that have happened. But, the moments that stand out for me are, the small little glimpses of things that you see. I remember Andrew van Zyl losing to that guillotine choke to Ruan Potts at the Coca-Cola Dome backstage crying. Broken man that he lost his title. It's things like that you go, wow, sport really means so much to so many people. And those are the moments that stand out for me more than anything else.
That's the personal things, not the actual, the most obvious ones. Let's get on to EFC 56, which is happening next week. It's going to be a cracker. Yannick Belfort against David Bursky. it's a strange fight because it's the headliner, but it's two guys who always seem to be underestimated, don't they? I mean, no one gave Yannick. He's always kind of like underwhelmed people, even though he's always talked the hype, and everyone keeps writing David Bursky off, and I don't get it. Why is that? I mean, it's still a great fight.
You should ask the people that are doing that. I've got no idea. I think Dave is absolutely legitimate, and if anyone had any doubt, go watch the Martin van Staden fight.
Yeah.
I think he's been a little bit up and down in the early days of his career, but he's certainly where he operates at now. It's at a very, very high level. And you could see that in the Martin van Staden fight. It was a very closely contested fight that, without a doubt, I believe he won.
Yeah.
But you saw his skill level. You saw everything that he has, the heart, his actual striking ability, the grappling ability, the work he did in the clinch. He's absolutely legit. And it's going to be a tough fight for him. If it wasn't for Michiel Opperman, I think we would be sitting here saying, Yannick Belfort is the most lethal guy in that division. I think what Michiel did has probably made Yannick a lot more human now as to where he was before. He was, Yannick himself was running around calling himself not only the best athlete in the division, but also in the whole organization.
Yeah.
So I think people. And that's also another thing about MMA. You're only as good as your last fight, and the fans can sometimes be unforgiving. You look at a guy that's got a couple of good victories, and then he gets one big knockout, and they're like, that guy's no good.
Yeah,
and he's a
right.
dangerous athlete. He's really, really good everywhere. So it's a tough fight stylistically. It's a great matchup, and it's it's something I'm certainly looking forward to.
But do you honestly really think? Have you ever at one point realised, yes, Yannick Belfort's stand-up game is really good? Have you ever seen any evidence from his stand-up is great? Because I've given him a hard time in the past about his stand-up game, and I just can't see it. He's fought 4 times now in the UFC, and I can't recall a point where I thought, wow, what great head movement. Wow, what a great combination.
I don't think it's his strong point. As
he says he is. He started out as a boxer, he said, and I was like, okay. I gave him a hard time. He's gonna kill me.
Find a fighter that'll tell you, no, my stand-up is actually weak. I'm gonna go for the ground game.
That's fair enough. But look at how JP teed off at him when he fought JP Kruger.
Yeah, but JP was also on that night.
He was.
It was, that was by far the best we've ever seen JP in the stand-up game. Even though he's traditionally been a stand-up fighter, he was just on. Everything worked that night. He landed some really clean, really crisp shots on Yannick. Yannick still got the victory.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. As much as he hasn't been flashy and he hasn't overwhelmed anyone with his stand-up game, he's still a very dangerous fighter, and he finds a way to win.
Yeah, no, Yannick's jits is legit, and as that kind of sized middleweight, it's his top control. It's going to be very difficult for David if he's in that position.
Yeah.
As a South African, I don't know if you've seen the latest countdown show where Yannick's talking to the South African fans and telling them to F off.
Not making friends.
Giving the double finger. He never does he? As a South African, does that ever get to you? Does that piss you off, or is it like it's just part of the game to you?
It's showmanship. It's part of the game. I think, and I suppose I've also had actual one-on-one conversations with him, and he's by no means a douchebag. He's a nice guy. He's actually quite respectful. I think, as with any professional sportsman in this game, where it's not a team sport by any stretch of the imagination. It's one-on-one. You have to promote yourself. You have to either turn yourself into a villain, or try and be the hero and try and be everyone's hero. And I think there are so many heroes and so few villains that it's just so much easier to be the villain and vilify an entire nation is one thing, but people still want to see him fight, whether it's you want to go watch him lose or want him to go watch him win. He's doing, he's saying things that are sometimes harsh, but you'll remember Shelson and how successfully he did that by vilifying the whole of Brazil back in the day, and it worked for him. It got bums and seats. People were interested in his fights, and he has the skills to back it up. So. I don't think that's actually who he is. That's a persona that he puts out, and it's getting under people's skin.
It does. It really does. And it's the same thing with all the other Brits as well, like Joe, Azzy Thomas, they all said that. But I think the most telling point in that countdown show was when Yannick said, F off to all the South African fans, go buy a ticket, I'll see you at the night. In the same sense, he's saying...
Please still come watch me.
Buy the tickets.
Please still spend your money and come watch me. So it's
read into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you think either man would stand up against Norman Vassell? Because we got the news this week Norman is moving down to middleweight, something we knew here and there, but never officially said that he's going to move to middleweight. He will take on the winner of this fight.
Yeah,
how do you see Norman stacking up against either of these two guys?
if Norman is able to make the weight and he's working with the right guys, I know you've interviewed them and spoken to them as well, if he can make the weight, he's going to be a dangerous person for that weight division. You know, the Norman Vassell that fought 3 years ago, even 2 years ago, is not the same monster as what he is now. You know, he has very few, if any, holes in his game. He is very aggressive. He's one of those fighters that brings the fight to you, and he tends to get into people's heads. I personally feel he scares a lot of fighters. As much as you're a pro fighter, you shouldn't get scared. You know, he intimidates people, and he's a big polarizing figure to make the cut down to middleweight. You know, if he can do that, and if he's able to not deplete himself, and he still has the same sort of energy, and he still has the same sort of stamina. And he keeps his strength and his movement. He'll obviously still have it at a lighter weight. But man, oh man, a dangerous cut. But you know, that being said, the other guys in that division, they aren't any pushovers either. No. I think for him also possible motivation is there's a lot more competition for him at middleweight. There are world-class fighters in the EFC middleweight division, and I'm sure he wants to test himself against the best that there is.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that. I mean, this black belt that he brought back from Florianopolis this year, along with Richard and Gareth McClellan, I mean, his jits this year is just on a whole different plane for the same fighter you're talking about 2 years ago.
And I think this is what people don't see. Just because he hasn't been inside the EFC hexagon for quite some time, he hasn't been at home playing PlayStation. You know, he's been putting in a lot of hours on the mat. He is striking and wrestling and doing the jiu-jitsu every single day, many times a day. He's getting better, even though we're not seeing him inside the hexagon. Behind the scenes, he's putting in a lot of work. And the other guys are still competing. They are getting better, you know. But you have to put in the work behind the scenes. And I think, you know, again, if he can make the weight and make it safely, he's going to put some fresh blood into what is already a very competitive division.
It's going to be scary, absolutely scary. The other fight on the top of the card. I don't think that Rafael Haratic, the Polish guy, has fought anyone in the EFC on Dricus's level. Well, I mean, any respect to Warren or Kieran Davies or Gordon Woodman, but do you think we sometimes sell ourselves short when we get foreign fighters coming to South Africa and we kind of think they're going to steamroll our South African guys, and yet we suddenly realise with a guy like Dricus du Plessis that we've got fighters in the EFC that are international standard? Do you think South African MMA fans kind of like we put ourselves down sometimes?
That's so tough because as a sporting nation, we're a very proud nation and we believe that we can compete with the best in the world. I mean, years and years ago, we produced some of the best boxers on a world level. You know, not right now, but our rugby team consistently, we've been in the top 3, top 5, cricket team, the same story. So we produce world-class athletes. We've got swimmers, we've got, you know, track guys that are at that level. And as South Africans, I think a big part of us and a big majority of us want to believe that we have the same sort of level of MMA guys. You know, a guy like Boyd Allen comes to mind, certainly when you talk about that sort of top-tier level athlete. And Dricus du Plessis is, you know, for me, a new young guy. He is very good everywhere. He's got the self-confidence. He's also one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. But he's lethal. I think he's absolutely lethal, and I think he certainly can go all the way. I think he is a world-class athlete, and I believe he can compete against any international opponent that gets thrown in front of him.
So do you think Dricus du Plessis would be, in 2017, the next possible South African fighter based overseas and fighting in Vegas after Gareth? So you mentioned Boyd. Boyd's up there. But I think
Boyd, DeMott, I mean, there really are a couple of guys that I think you could comfortably throw into any organization in the world. And not only will they compete at that level, but they can also get victories at that level. You know, I'm not saying they're going to win titles in the next 2 or 3 months, but certainly they'll be able to compete and they'll be able to build on that.
Sure.
Dricus is still very young. There's no need for him to try and spread his wings elsewhere. I think he's got a lot of competition in EFC still, and the great thing that EFC is doing at the moment as well for guys that are running out of competition locally, they're bringing in some top tier guys from camps overseas. So, you know, as an athlete, sure, he probably wants to spread his wings and go and see what else is out there. But why put yourself on a 16-hour flight when you can sleep in your own bed at your own house and then, you know, drive to the arena to go and fight on the day? If you're fighting the same caliber of guy, test yourself here for a couple of years, you know, against good guys that are coming in, and then, you know, take it from there.
Yeah, I agree completely with you, because if you look at some of his, if you look at the training partners you got at CIT, And you look at some of the guys that are training at 5 position. That's an incredible fight team. To you could go and be a small fish at AKA or go anywhere in the States or go to TriStar, and you won't get that level of competition with the fight team every day on those mats. And it's not just that level of athlete that's increasing. I think that the actual, over the past few years, to see how CIT and FFM have upped their game in terms of the way they train.
Crazy.
Their training is at an international standard, not just the individual athletes, and that's part of the answer. I'm really looking forward to Iga Cabeza and Henry Borta, and it's simply because I'm a massive wrestling fan. They both got great knockout power.
Yeah.
But I just want to see a proper wrestling scrap. I mean, how do you see that fight going down?
Well, you're probably going to get exactly that. It's no, make no mistake. Iga he's probably got the best wrestling for MMA, and we saw that in the Danny Henry fight. He is absolutely incredible. He
said it was an easy 5 rounds for him as well. I was like, well.
Look, let's be fair. He made it look relatively easy. I don't think there was any point in that fight where he was in any danger of being finished.
Yeah.
If he somehow ended up in a bottom position like this, he was able to sweep, reverse, get in the top position. He's so good in the scramble as well. Yeah. And his takedown is sudden. It is so sudden. It's so quick that he dictates where it takes place. Buerta also very, very high-level wrestling guy. And you might see a stand-up war between the two guys. They might think that the other one's wrestling is of that caliber that they don't want to necessarily go out and wrestle because it's so easy to make a mistake in MMA. You put one foot in the wrong position and you end up in a bottom position. Yeah. And with the level that these two guys are, you're not going to sweep Buerta as easily as what you would have sweep half of the guys in the division.
Sure.
Interesting fight. Very tough guys. Iga's coming from a completely different camp in this fight as well. We'll have to see what sort of role that will play in this fight. Both of them are extremely focused. It's going to be a fun fight, absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be a cracker. I really can't wait for that. Just because I just love wrestling, and it's just great to see a good ground game. Wesley, Hawkey, Azzy, Thomas.
My best fight in that whole card.
Wow. It's all a big card, but what the hell?
Yeah.
What is going to happen? We talk about all these other three main fights and the two title fights. But the Azzy Thomas coming back, he's put the cat amongst the pigeons in that division, but he's facing Wesley Hawkey's resurgent as hell.
Well, let's take a moment just to appreciate where Wesley Hawkey was a couple of years ago to where he is now.
Yeah.
His boxing is so crisp and he's got so much power. His foot movement, his head movement it's sublime. Yeah. Azzy Thomas, we saw glimpses. I don't think Boyd was the best opponent for him because Boyd is a very rangy sort of fight style where he pretty much dictates where the fight takes place. We saw, I think it was one burst in the third round where Azzy put a lethal combination together that it rung his bell. Make no mistake about it. Boyd will never admit it, but certainly rung his bell. And you've got two guys that are obviously boxing at a very, very high level, putting on the teeny tiny small MMA gloves and going to try and take each other's heads off.
Yeah.
Weasley's also got a big mouth. He likes to talk a big game. He can back it up, as does Azzy Thomas. So, I think we're going to see fireworks. For me, that's probably my favorite fight on the card.
Yeah, I agree.
Is the two of them. It's, they're both so talented and they're so close to the top of the division, as it is.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a great fight.
It's interesting to see what you say. I agree with you when you say about Wesley's improved. When he moved down to Mazamtoti to train with Morné Swanepoel, it's funny that I should say his stand-up's improved drastically when I want to see how far his ground game has come, and I don't think he's going to want to mix on the feet. Even though Wesley's stand-up is great, I'd like to see him take Azzy down because I'm not sure if we've seen how well Azzy Thomas as a boxer does on the ground. That'll be interesting.
I'm sure Azzy Thomas, as with all other MMA athletes, he works diligently on every single aspect of the game because you have to. You can't afford to have holes against anyone. Wesley has a very good takedown. He actually likes to do that. We remember a couple of years ago he preferred that as a fighting style to basically put the guy down and work ground and pound. He particularly likes doing it in front of his own corner. Very dangerous, very, very good at doing that. His last couple of fights, we haven't seen that though. I think he really believes in his stand-up. He really believes in the power. He believes in his hands. He can take a shot. Make no mistake about that. He takes a shot very, very well. You've had big guys tee off on him, and no qualm in the world. He's a very tough boy, and he's got it's just such a beautiful style with the boxing coming out southpaw. That's another interesting question. It's for a guy like Ozzy Thomas to face. I'm sure they've had sparring partners emulate the southpaw stance in the gym, but you don't necessarily have guys that have his sort of fluidity and the speed that Weasley does have. It comes as a surprise, and the strong hand is now the other hand. So there's different things to look out for him. But for Weasley, it's also a tough fight. I think it's probably the hardest puncher that he's probably faced so far in his career.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to watch out for the power as well as the speed that Ozzy Thomas has.
It's a great fight for Weasley because Ozzy's a Commonwealth boxer, and is like, you're talking about that southpaw challenge. I think it's going to be. I agree with you. I think it's a fight of the night. It's probably the most fascinating fight of the entire event. No disrespect to the other fighters. Let's go past the UFC 6 and go look at 2017. What's in store for you, Dirk Steenkamp, next year?
She's just lots more fights, cool stuff happening in UFC.
Cool. My last very quick question to you. Next Springbok coach, Johan Ackerman. Yes or no?
Yes.
I agree. Dirk Steenkamp, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Simon.
With Clinch, chatting all things MMA.